Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. One moment. It's my boy Saul. He likes to be around me, as I've said numerous times. It's Friday, the 22nd of August at 10:21 p.m. The first thing that I want to address is the series of generational podcasts I did, specifically focusing on one generation that generally is defined by the letters B and B, which I will not repeat again. Now, people, it's come to my attention, are very bothered by these podcasts. But I don't see how we can begin to solve the problem unless we diagnose it. And it begins there. You know, what the remedy is, I don't know. I have a vague idea. I'll try and give you a ham-fisted interpretation of it tonight. You know, some people might just say that Western society is the result of too much. That we had too much for too long. And that we lost our deservedness of it. We lost our appreciation and our gratitude for things. All of us. I'm not speaking generationally here. I'm speaking as a society. Speaking as an individual, I feel quite confident saying, all immodesty aside, I never lost my gratitude. And that's largely due to the fact that my father and my mother made my life as miserable and difficult as humanly possible. You might even go so far as to say that it was a kind of attempted murder through psychological defeat. A kind of soft Moloch ritual, if you will, where I was driven to such extremes of alienation that a normal person might have committed suicide. But in my darkest moment, there waiting for me was the practice of meditation, exactly as I described it in The Devil in Us, in those first 3 chapters. And I kept meditating because it was a lifeline for me. I kept my inner life alive because it was a lifeline for me. And I kept my inner life alive because I had no choice, because my existence without an inner life was no existence at all. I was as low gets. I wasn't living on the streets, but the truth is most people in this time, so this would have been about 1982, fall of 1982. Most people at that time who ended up on the streets were there by bad lifestyle choices. Not so much anymore. A lot of people can end up on the streets, and I'll be honest with you. I've been watching a number of videos on regular people bailing, getting out of, evacuating Western countries. There's some this is a whole genre of podcasting now. I've found them in Australia. or Australians who've left and who are podcasting from outside of Australia, or Australians who are in Australia but making preparations to leave and giving their reasons why as a kind of eulogy of sorts for the death of their relationship with their birth country. The same thing is going on in Canada in very big measure. And they're in the United States now too. This massive white Christian diaspora. One might even go so far as to say, we are the new Jews. The Jews became the Jews in 72 AD when they lost their homeland and the temple was destroyed. And there was that rather cataclysmic event in their culture. So here I'm talking about the mass suicide at Masada, a mountaintop fortress in present-day Israel, which took place around 73-74 AD. And this event occurred a few years after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. I get that wrong sometimes. I've seen historical accounts that say 72, 70, but I mean close enough, right? And this was the final stages of the first Jewish-Roman War. And we have the account of Josephus. I'll read it. The primary, and for a long time, only source for this event is the Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. In his book, The Jewish War, he recounts the final stand of a group of Jewish rebels known as the Sicarii, which in Spanish is where they get Sicario from, assassin. According to Josephus, the Sicarii, led by Eleazar ben Yair, had taken refuge in the fortress of Masada. The Romans, under the command of Lucius Flavius Silva, laid a siege that lasted for several months. They constructed a massive siege ramp to reach the fortress. When it became clear that the Romans would breach the walls, Eleazar ben Yair gave 2 impassioned speeches urging his people to kill themselves rather than be captured and enslaved. He argued that it was a glorious and heroic death, preferable to a life of infamy. Josephus's account states that the defenders, numbering 960 men, women, and children, decided to commit suicide. They first chose 10 men by lot to kill the rest. Then one of the 10 men was chosen to kill the other 9. And finally, he killed himself. When the Romans entered the fortress, they found a citadel of death, with all the inhabitants slain, but with their food and water supplies left intact, as a testament to their deliberate choice to die, rather than be captured. Josephus claims to have heard this story from 2 women and 5 children, who survived by hiding in the underground cavern. While the story of Masada is a powerful one and has become a symbol of Jewish heroism and resolve, its historical accuracy is a subject of much debate among scholars. Excavations at Masada in the 1960s, led by the Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin, uncovered some evidence that was interpreted as supporting Josephus's account, such as skeletons, pottery shards with names that might have been used for the lottery, and evidence of a massive fire. However, the archaeological record also has inconsistencies. The number of skeletons found is far fewer than the 960 people Josephus mentions. And there are discrepancies between Josephus's descriptions of the fires and the physical evidence of burning. Historians question Josephus's narrative for several reasons. He was a captured Jewish general who went over to the Roman side, so his account may have been written to appeal to his Roman patrons, or to portray the Jewish rebels as brave but ultimately misguided. Additionally, the speeches he attributes to Eleazar ben Yair are seen by many as literary creations in the style of Greek and Roman historians, not actual verbatim accounts. The concept of mass suicide was also a popular literary motif in that period. Traditional Jewish law prohibits suicide, which has led some scholars to question whether a group of devout Jews would have taken this action. Josephus himself had a personal experience with a similar situation at Jotapata and argued against suicide. So the story of the mass suicide at Masada is a dramatic and important part of the historical narrative of the First Jewish-Roman War. And it's long been a powerful symbol, especially in modern Israel, of a people's determination to choose death over subjugation. While Josephus's account is the only written record of the event, its details are subject to scholarly scrutiny and debate, and archaeological evidence has offered both support and challenges to its veracity. So, what we know most definitively was that time, 70, 72 AD, 76 AD, first century after the death of Christ, or thereabouts, was the end of Israel as we know it. I mean, from the moment the Jews took control over it, it was really over. Sorry, the Romans. Now, the Romans had the habit of, in certain instances, leaving a local potentate in charge. You know, a man of the people governed by the Romans, and that local potentate would be agent provocateur for the Romans. This was the case when Christ was born and Herod was in power, and Herod had purchased his position from the Romans with gold, went to see them in Rome. I believe he spoke to Marcus Aurelius, and entered into a negotiation with them and was given autonomous leadership over Jerusalem and the Jews, and what was that the Jewish kingdom of that time, which was bigger than Jerusalem. It's also an indication of the lack of unity in the Jewish world, and an example of Jew-on-Jew predation. You know, if the biblical accounts are correct and the birth of the Christ is as we have been told, Herod's necromancers is, and by the way, it is really quite astounding how many examples they give in the Bible of the difference between psychic and spiritual. you kind of gloss over them because you don't really understand what's being said. You know, you do it your whole life and you never really put one and one together and articulate it in just a clear, plain English expression, which is what I try to do on the Talamanca Review. So these soothsayers of that time, you know, the people counseling Herod would have been people like, you know, like these remote viewers we see now, like Courtney Brown, or like an Andrew Bartzis type character, a sage, an oracle, right? A master psychic. And it's interesting how in the Bible they consistently paint that as not only dissimilar to spiritual consciousness, but in most instances antagonistic to it. Now, some modern spiritual seekers who want to rationalize their fascination with magic and power would suggest that that is a form of mind control, that we're not supposed to develop our own powers, and that these religious teachings are a form of subjugation of the human race. And it's an interesting proposition because in one way I agree and in one way I disagree. My agreement is that in the time we live, the religious teachings have become a kind of mind control of people. When you see people like Donald Trump winning significant portions of the American vote because he's clever enough to go and do photo ops with evangelicals who lay their hands on him, you can pretty well assume that your religion has been propagandized and that it has been assimilated into a much darker machine. And so can we deduce that the religion of today would be a Herod-type religion? I'd say yes. I'd say most of Christianity today is a system of power and control. And to have power and control, you have to have information. And in the field of information, there is no more important information than what we would call occult information. Now, here's the part of the biblical and the Abrahamic teachings that I do agree with and which I proselytize endlessly on the Talamanca Review. And that is that there is a profound difference between psychic expansion of consciousness and spiritual expansion of consciousness. They seem like the same. Okay, but the psychic consciousness is a kind of synthetic or duplicated or copied or cloned version of the spiritual. And this persists all the way to the present day. So we know a new day is coming. Because you don't have to be an oracle, you don't have to be an astrology expert to understand what's coming. The first signal of what's coming is what the negatives are doing. And the negatives will do a grotesque pantomime of it because everything that runs through their hands gets vulgarized. Made vulgar because they're vulgar, and anything they touch takes on their vulgarity. But what do we see from these people who are running the world now? They've always been in charge, right? From Herod to Donald Trump, it's been the same kinds of people in charge of the world and nations. We've lived through an extremely negative period. Let's just be honest about that. And remember my philosophy that the left hand and the right hand are part of the same body. And that faith is the belief that there's a larger plan in this that is divine. And we just can't see it now, and we have to have faith that the Creator is in charge of everything. And ultimately, the Creator is in charge of everything. But it takes tremendous courage to see life that way, and a tremendous sacrifice and forfeiture of your own self-interest, including in some instances your own physical existence in certain incarnations. Very difficult to do. And it becomes a kind of version of the story of Masada. Whether it happened or whether it did not happen is irrelevant. So a new day is coming and a new man is coming, where man is humanity, and forgive me for not saying man and woman, but I like the classical language. I'm not trying to be sexist, and I do believe in the first two waves of feminism. I do believe in women voting, and I do believe in women in the workforce. It just gets a little wonky for me after second generation feminism. So what are the soothsayers and the necromancers and the astrologers and the power-based occultists telling us the future is? How is it that they're telling us a new man is coming? Well, like Dr. Frankenstein, they're trying to build one. And the very fact that they're trying to build one means that they pulled that idea of a new man from somewhere. And that somewhere is the ether space of imagination that is populated by the edicts of the divine. What's allowed to come into the astral in any given period. Right now we're finishing up the age of Pisces. I'm not sure if we're in Aquarius yet. I'm not an astrologer, sorry. But what's allowed to come into consciousness is the field of experience we're supposed to be working with and learning from in that period. And if you look at the last 2,600 years, that has been chaos and war and conflict. And everybody is working to end that. So the age we're going into will not have that. How do we know that? Because the new man that the occultists are trying to create will be devoid of the independent will to manufacture self-interest to the degree that it would wage war or kill another human being. Not because that new man is more virtuous, but because there will be chips and inhibitors in his brain and in his nervous system that will not allow him to do it. And so, and not to mention the fact that, tracking and surveillance will be so widespread that even if you did manage to do it, they'd pick you up within 30 minutes. It's going to be as close to pre-crime as possible without stopping the crime. If you remember that Philip K. Dick story that produced a Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, I believe, is the name of the movie. That's based on a Philip K. Dick novel. He didn't, just as an aside, poor Philip K. Dick didn't see any money in his life. He didn't live well, and the moment the guy was dead, just about everything he wrote got developed into film. You get Blade Runner, you get Minority Report, you get Running Man. With, is it Running Man? Or which is the one where Arnold Schwarzenegger goes to Mars? That's a Philip K. Dick story as well. You get a scanner Brightly, I think it's called, which they did a kind of animation on top of film for that one, and Keanu Reeves was in it. But it's just like everywhere you look, it's Philip K. Dick. The poor bastard was so far, he wrote from his heart, I mean, I think Dick was the real deal. I don't think he was in with the Dark Lords. I think the Star Trek guy was. I think he was a 33rd degree Mason, the guy that started Gene Roddenberry. I think he was a piece of shit. I shouldn't defame the man, on my podcast. Even I don't have so many listeners, but I've got to be more cautious about that. But anyways, let me just say that I don't think. This is just one guy's opinion who does a podcast called the Talamanca Review. I don't think Gene Roddenberry was working toward the benefit of humanity. I think Philip K. Dick was. But Gene Roddenberry lived very well. He was a Beverly Hills celebrity with all the writing credits and everything, and his name lived on in infamy. That, by the way, that's pretty much your litmus test about somebody's relationship to the system and their utility to it, is how materially well they do in their lifetime and how their work carries out in their lifetime. And no, I'm not talking like a bitter writer who hasn't reached the audience he thinks he deserves. It's just reality. Just look at it, You see it all the time. But I should do some research sometime on why don't I do it right now? I've got the ultimate research tool here. Who inherited the literary estate of Philip K. Dick, and were they given all of the money related to the film productions done on his books post-mortem? It's that simple once you got AI. AI is good for some things. The literary estate of Philip K. Dick is overseen by his children. This is indicated by a 2011 lawsuit in which Laura Archer Dick Coelho sued in federal court as trustee of the Philip K. Dick Trust. The trust is described as being overseen by Dick's children. Regarding the money from post-mortem film productions, the available information indicates that the literary estate managed by the trust receives payments from these productions. The lawsuit from 2011, for example, states that the trust sued movie makers for allegedly cheating them of millions of dollars in royalties from a film based on one of his stories. The complaint details a contract that included a purchase price and additional payments to the trust. A former literary executor, Paul Williams, had control of the estate before Dick's family asserted their control. The available information does not specify if the family received all of the money, but it does show that they were the recipients of payments and royalties from film rights. There you go. The unfortunate material life of Philip K. Dick, but I promise you there was a spiritual reward for him, or I assure you. He must have known in his heart he was doing work that would carry forward. He must have known. Because when you jump the timeline like that, so when you do something in your life that is going to affect the living inhabitants of this realm after your body ceases and your spirit leaves the body, the spirit knows that on some level. Like, we know everything. Even you who are listening to me right now, you know everything. The spiritual process is realizing that you know it is the spiritual process of learning to decode consciousness and the information you get from the various higher systems that contribute to your overall understanding of your existence. They generally circumvent the mind. Okay? And very often they will be directly imprinted on your spirit, which means that they will come in as images in your imagination. The imagination is not governed by the mind. That's why so many people lose their imaginations once they become institutionalized, which I think happens around the 7th grade. You can get away with imagination until you're about 12. And this is when I was growing up. I was 12 years old in 1978. I don't know what it's like to be 12 years old, born in 2013 and being 12 in 2025. If I wanted to be cynical, I might speculate that the imagination collapses even before 12, because the harsh realities of life come pouring into an individual. Anyways, that's quite a side detour there on Philip K. Dick. I can't even remember what I was talking about. So, yeah. Let's go right back to the beginning. So, in many ways, we're becoming diaspora people now. Because there's a spiritual force, or let's say a non-physical force, because I don't think this is a force that is coming from the divine. I think it's a magical force. I think it's a force coming out of the collective will of groups of people that have seized an amazing amount of power on this planet through the utility of money. And I think this is the culmination of a plan that's been cooking for at least 375 years, since the formation of the Bank of England. And most of these videos I watch now, the people are melancholic and at the same time kind of joyful that they're getting out. Some people are going to the Far East. They're going to Malaysia, Thailand. And I'm not talking about solo travelers here. I'm talking about families, like young families where the parents are in their late 20s or early 30s, and they've got 1, 2, or 3 children. They're leaving America and they're going abroad. And it's exactly like I've been telling people on the Talamanca Review. If you have a decent, just customer service job that you can do with a high-speed internet connection, and the company will give you the phone system software to download on your computer, and you just do customer support all day, you might be able to make, I don't know, like 2,000, 25, 2,600 US dollars a day. Now that would barely keep you fed and a roof over your head in Canada, Australia, or the United States now. But that's a king's ransom in many countries. And I did not realize the degree to which these Exodus videos are proliferating on the internet. I mean, mind you, once you watch 1 or 2, even half of them, if it's a 20-minute video and you watch 10 minutes, you've just informed your YouTube algorithm that you're interested in this sort of thing, and then they start to come flooding in. But there's a lot of them. This is the thing, a huge thing. And it's mainly millennials and Gen Z that are leaving. Most Gen Xers and baby boomers are holding their ground, probably because they already got a foothold in the old system, and financially their life's a little bit better, meaning they don't have to buy a house for $1.5 or $2 million, a normal house, nothing luxurious. When I say those numbers, I'm thinking of a place like Vancouver, but those numbers are even a bit low for Vancouver. Vancouver, you might have to pay $4 million, $5 million for a house now. And the Chinese have taken over that city. that was planned, absolutely planned, between the Canadian government and Beijing. And that's a whole other podcast. I won't get into it, but I hope I've built up enough credit with you folks that I can say things flippantly that at a factual level, or, if you take it to be true, it's quite a caustic statement. I hope I've built up enough credit with you that you believe me. I have no reason to lie, no reason to embellish, no reason to be hyperbolic. It just is what it is. We're witnessing the collapse of the West. And many people that are going to survive are going to be diaspora people. Now, it's not going to get any better. And just because you're still holding your own now, let's say you're 64, 67 years old, you made a living as a lawyer or in technology or an accountant. You may have started your career. I mean, if you're let's say 67 now, you probably would have started your career probably around 1980. So you had two, maybe if we peg the decline at 2010, and I think the decline really kicks in 2010. There was a brief proliferation of capital with the injection of money from the bail-ins after the subprime mortgage housing collapse or mortgage collapse in the United States. So that kept the roulette table spinning. Okay, so if you started working in 1980, with a graduate degree, because in 1980 you didn't need master's degrees. Now, these poor kids now, they got to have master's degrees to get a management position at Dairy Queen. Everybody's educated and there's no work for them. I really feel for these people coming up, including my son. And this business I'm building here is for him. Once it's up and running and, the tourists are booked and we've got a basic budget, okay, we're going to make X number of dollars this year. It's his business. He built this house with his own hands, man. I paid for things, sure, but 10 years ago, labor was quite a bit cheaper in Costa Rica. This economy has changed quite a bit as well. I see it most distinctly in the price of coffee because it's the thing I am most consistently in my life. And the price of coffee, even in Costa Rica, has doubled since 2015, in a decade. And I'm talking about domestic brands, okay? Coffee that's grown, roasted, and grinded here. So Brandon, my son, he came over at 18 and he built this place with his own hands. I came up on weekends, paid the workers. I had done quite a bit of research on earth bag building. I checked the lines and everything, but once a few mistakes were made on the first house, everybody knew what they were doing and it was fairly straightforward. And he worked for about a year or 14 months for me, and I never paid him a dime. It was a father-son adventure. And now, because of that investment he made, I hope that there's an opportunity for him to live here and have a family and go on with life without the kind of fear and horror and indignity that is going to attend life in the first world for people who are not newly appointed residents and under the care of the various governments who are regaling them with copious amounts of money that go beyond any workman compensation or unemployment payment or welfare benefit the denizens of those countries have ever received. In excess of the highest amount you could get as a natural-born Australian, Canadian, or American. You know, the amount they're giving the immigrants is sometimes 3, 4, 5 times that much. Sometimes up to $5,000 per family. And they don't even have to work. But there's no replacement theory. There's no white genocide. There's no destruction of white Christian society. Who are you going to believe? Yourself with what you see with your own eyes? Or the bought and paid for pseudo-pundits who are telling you it's not happening so they can maintain another 5 or 10 years of material dignity to their lives by spewing lies on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which has to be one of the most insipid institutions in the world now. And that I would carry that to all 3 countries. So the British Broadcasting Corporation and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I mean, they're worse than Pravda now. And I have a lot of people who worked there and went to very senior positions as producers. I follow them on Facebook and Threads and Instagram. I went to university with them. Remember, I got a journalism degree. And they're completely remiss. You know, they're just like, well, I deserve this. I worked hard. You know? Well, like I said, this situation is not going to get any better. And they're doing it in stages because if they tried to do it all at once, the population might be able to still put up some form of resistance. Okay? And it can't be done. So they're going after the poor first, and they're flooding the streets with cheap, highly deadly, highly intoxicating narcotics, debilitating narcotics, tranq, fentanyl, oxy, heroin. And that stuff's purposely being allowed through the borders. You can't tell me that the DEA is doing its job or anybody's doing their job. This is purposely being let in. And they've got the drug cities everywhere, and people are living in those streets in tents and getting high every day and assaulting people who are not denizens of those delimited blocks of free and unprosecuted drug usage, and camping and squatting in parks, on sidewalks, in tents. They're destroying those people. No, that's another version of the euthanasia program, because it's being done voluntarily by the people. They don't have the spiritual fortitude to face their lives, and so they disappear. And they don't have the courage to kill themselves. So they disappear into drugs, lose their mind, and eventually die of what they could reasonably tell themselves were natural causes. Drug addiction. Pathetic. Then it creeps up from there to the working class person who's got their head on, doesn't have a drinking problem, doesn't have a drug problem. And they're generally working in factories and stuff, and Amazon worker. Amazon would be a good job for a college kid. You can't support a family on an Amazon wage, right? And so all of these people are being weaned out now, being taken out of the game, and they're desperate. How do I get out of here? And then they're going after the middle class now too, by making sure another middle class never comes about, because the houses are too prohibitive to buy, which I find really strange, because the immigrants don't have the money to buy the houses, like the Latin Americans and Mexicans crossing the southern border in the U.S. don't have $1 million to buy a house. The low-caste Hindu Indians being dumped in large numbers into Canada don't have the money to buy $1 million house. And not only that, here's another curious thing about the Canadian immigration plan, is that it's actually reigniting an old feud between the Sikhs and the Hindus, which goes back to the Khalistan incident in the mid 80s, which was tipped off by Indira Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards murdering her because she ordered the military to enter the Golden Temple, the holiest site of the Sikh religion, which is in northern India in a city called Amritsar. And then we had a massive exodus of Sikhs from India through the 80s and early 90s. And that was the first wave of Indians in Canada. So much so that when I was growing up, when I was in my early 20s, we didn't call them Indians. We called them Punjabis because they were all from the province of Punjab, which is the Sikh province. Now all of the Indians coming over are Hindus. And there are massive clashes going on between the Sikhs and the Hindus. And when I say massive, I mean thousands of Hindus and thousands of Sikhs showing up on a street brandishing baseball bats, 20-inch swords, chains, no firearms, no guns, but it's like, who's doing this at Canadian immigration? Did it not occur to them that suddenly flooding Canada with 4 or 5 million Hindu Indians would not go well with the existing Punjabi population of 2 or 3 million Punjabi Indians living in Canada? There's nobody minding the store. Okay? You cannot rationalize these policies any longer. These stupid liberals who want to live in delusion continue to believe long disproven theories like climate change. Well, we have to let them in, Bruce, because our industrial capacity over the last 100 years has affected the climate and it's too hot to live in India. So we have a moral obligation. It's a cognitive dissonance. Those people are, they're retarded. You can't get through to them. They're retarded. They've been fully programmed. There's no getting through to them. Now, a question I've been wondering for some time now is what language is going to dominate the world? Because the middling forces coming up behind the white English empire, and let's just call it that, white English, okay? Because you could say it was British, British-American, Anglo-American Empire. The British were out doing their looting and pillaging thing from about 1700 onwards. America got formed and confederated in, 1776? Yeah. And after World War II, I'd say that the transfer of power amongst these groups went from London to Washington, at least insofar as the military stuff. London used to do that stuff there on their own. They had a pretty good military. And then America picked it all up. But it's really all of us. It's Canada, it's Australia. And while I don't necessarily believe the full narrative of the colonial oppressor as it's being taught by liberal communist professors in North America is accurate, nor do I believe critical race theory is accurate, at the same time, we do have to take some responsibility for what we did. Okay? But anyways, that aside, these societies are being shut down now. Like a circus packing up on a Sunday night, putting everything on the train. They used to have Barnum Bailey and those big circuses that used to travel around in the early and mid 20th century. Early, mid, and late 20th century. They always used to put the circus beside the train tracks. Okay? So it would be like a huge parking lot beside train tracks. That would be the location. And that was so they could pack the whole thing up. You know how hard it is to pack up a circus? 15 or 20 elephants, you need a train. Lions, all the tents, all the equipment, all the generators. It's a massive affair. And they were so good and so efficient at disassembling the circus, packing it up, and moving on that it was studied by logistical officers in various militaries. How did circus people become so good at moving this much equipment, this many animals, and this many people in 12 hours? Barnum and Bailey could have taught the Pentagon how to evacuate Afghanistan. I shit you not. Okay? And I use the example of the circus packing up because it's the whole Western world now. They don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit. And it's not going to get any better. Okay? So let's keep going up the chain. So the middle class white people, if they're like in their early 60s, let's say they're Gen Xers and they've got kids in their early 20s, because a lot of Gen Xers waited till mid-30s or even to 40 years old to have kids, right? It was a very late breeding generation, Gen X. The baby boomers were a bit earlier. Now, the Gen Xers, when they finally did settle down and have families, I think they were a little bit more serious about it than the baby boomers. And please, don't bite my head off. I've had people cancel subscriptions over this stuff. Okay? It's how, I want you to think about that for a moment. The stuff I talk about on the Talamanca Review, child destruction, child rape, child sacrifice, but touch those sacred baby boomers, I'm going to cancel my subscription. Truth is difficult sometimes, okay? So what's going to happen next is this destruction is just going to keep going up the ladder of white prosperity. And what they'll do to shake the boomers out is they will increase property taxes to absurd amounts. Okay, that no reasonable person based on the last 70 years of data would have been able to predict that municipal and provincial and state governments would quadruple property taxes, or even more than quadruple property taxes. But that's what they're going to do, because that's how they're going to flush the baby boomers out of their comfortable retirements. Okay, I'm not trying to be a voice of doom or to scare you. I'm just, keep it in the back of your mind. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I mean, this is a pretty heartless system we're living in now. I read a blog today sent by my friend Jim in Panama, who I'll be going to see next week, that 20% of all deaths in Canada now are by euthanasia. That's 1/5 of all deaths. Okay? Hang on a sec. Let's just do the math on this. How many people die in a year in Canada? Let's see. I'm just loving this Gemini. It's a wonderful podcast aid. I sound like a genius. When I don't know something, I just look it up. Okay, so 2019, 285,000. I don't think euthanasia was in then. 2020, 308. 2021, 313. 2022, 336. And 2023, 326. And they say this is preliminary data. So this would have been Statistics Canada. So we don't have 24 and 25, but let's take 2023, okay? So if you have 326,000, what's 20% of 326? Grade 9 math skills, I shit you not. So that's 65,200 people by euthanasia. I'd say it's probably up around 100,000 now. And I don't trust these statistics. I think there have been a lot more deaths with COVID. A lot more, okay? And remember, we're only a country of like 40 million, 42 million people. Not a big country at all, not a high population like the United States. So imagine a country of 40 million people where somewhere between 60 and 100,000 people, if my projection into 2025 and going forward into 2026 is accurate, and there's no reason to think I'm not in the ballpark, if not dead on within 1 or 2%. You're looking at like 100,000 people a year committing government suicide, euthanasia. That is a staggering testament to the depression in that society, the sense of worthlessness. It's mind-boggling to me. Absolutely mind-boggling. Well, I think I've rattled on long enough for tonight. Bit of an old school, cynical Talamanca review. Cynical depending on what you do with the information. You know? I think I'm going to title this one, "It's Not Going to Get Any Better." I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.